What is up, guys? Today we are checking out a motherboard from Aorus. It is their X299 Gaming 9. It is pretty much their flagship X299 motherboard, and it's one of the most feature-packed X299 boards out there. So let's go ahead and take a look. If you guys remember, we used this board in our Ultimate RGB build, and I'll have that link below, and I'll put a card in here so you guys can check that out. But when it's all lit up, it does look pretty awesome. As we take a first look at the board, we have our typical ATX form factor, and this board is all black with sort of gunmetal accents. There's not anything crazy on the PCB itself, just because Aorus lets the RGB LEDs do all the talking. When you pick the motherboard up, you'll notice it's actually really heavy. That's because there's a large metal base plate that takes up most of the rear of the board. This helps better support the board, and on top of that, it will help with cooling. Starting at the CPU socket, we have Intel's LGA 2066 socket, and that of course supports Intel's Core X series processors. The board has a true 8-phase all-digital power design that will condition your CPU. You do get dual 8-pin EPS connectors with this board, and that's really great if you're going to be doing any type of overclocking on the 10+ core Intel X series CPUs. We know they draw a ton of power when you go to overclock, so it's good to have two here. Moving over, we have our RGB header and then two 4-pin fan headers for our CPU fans. On each side of the CPU socket, you are going to find 4 Ddr4 slots, giving you a total of 8. These slots support Ddr4 up to 4400 MHz and beyond, as well as having broad compatibility with over 1000 Ddr4 kits that have been validated. Each Ddr4 slot is metal shielded, and there are rows of RGB LEDs in between each slot. As we move over to the far edge of the board, you're going to find a 4-pin fan header, a 2-pin temperature probe connector, 24-pin ATX power connection, another 4-pin fan header, a USB 3.0 header, and USB 3.1 Type-C internal header. Coming down the board, you're going to find all of your SATA connections, which are at a typical 90-degree angle. They're a total of 8, and they're all powered by the X299 PCH. These ports support RAID modes 0, 1, 5, and 10. As we look at the PCH heatsink, it has the Aorus logo on it, and that's going to light up with RGB lighting when you have your system powered on. Right below it is an M.2 slot that supports M.2 SSDs up to 80mm, and it does have an integrated heatsink on it that's actually made to match up with a PCH heatsink, and I really like this implementation because it doesn't look out of place. Along the bottom of the board, you're going to find the rest of your headers, buttons, and connections. So from left to right, you have your HD audio header, a thermo probe header, LED demo header, RGB header, digital RGB header, and don't mistake this for your Thunderbolt 3.0 header, TPM header, eco button, OC button, reset button, power button, 2 USB 2.0 headers, 2 4-pin fan headers, a postcode display, USB 3.0 header, VROC header, BIOS reset buttons, and your front panel headers. On this board, you're going to find one of the best onboard audio solutions anywhere on a motherboard. You have the Realtek ALC 1220 audio processor, as well as the ESS Sabre reference DAC, and there's tons of high quality components that I suggest you read up on the Aorus website. This audio solution is insane, and it's one of the reasons why this motherboard is just so expensive. As far as expansion slots go, we have a total of 5 PCI Express 3.0 X16 slots. Each one of these slots include metal shielding for better protection and to help with GPU sag. Now, if you're going to be installing a dual GPU setup, you're going to want to install your cards in slot 1 and slot 3 for the best bandwidth. Sitting above and below the top expansion slot, you will find 2 M.2 slots. The top slot supports M.2 SSDs up to 80mm, whereas the bottom one supports SSDs up to 110mm. Both of these slots have large integrated heatsinks. These heatsinks are very heavy, and they're some of the best M.2 heatsinks that I've seen on a motherboard so far. On top of the 3 M.2 slots that are on the board, Aorus also includes a PCI Express card that has another M.2 slot on it, and it has a very cool heatsink that has the Aorus logo. Finally, we come to our rear I/O, and the first thing you're going to notice is that the rear I/O shield is actually built into the motherboard. I love this just for the fact that I lose these all of the time, and it just makes installation easier as well. So as far as connections go, from left to right, we have our combination PS2 port, 2 USB 3.0 DAC up ports, 2 normal USB 3.0 ports, a USB 3.1 Type-C port, 4 USB 3.1 Type-A ports, killer Ethernets, Intel Ethernets, our Wi-Fi antenna connections, and our gold-plated audio connections. As I mentioned, this board is loaded with RGB LEDs, and I think it has the most RGB LEDs out of any X299 board out there. So you have RGB LEDs on all of the expansion slots, the PCH heatsink, memory slots, above the CPU socket, on the rear I/O cover, and on the audio components cover, as well as the rear I/O shield. You also have 2 RGBW LED headers on the board, plus a digital RGB header. And for those who don't know, the digital RGB header allows you to control each individual LED on a digital LED strip. So not only does this board look great, but it's packed with features as well. You have support for dual graphics cards, you have dual Ethernet as well as Wi-Fi, you have up to 4 M.2 slots in one of the best audio solutions that you're going to find on a motherboard out right now. And there's so much more, and we cover all of that in our full written review, which I will have linked below, so you can check all of that out. And that does include gaming benchmarks and all of that fun stuff. Now, if you enjoyed this video, go ahead and hit that like button, and if you enjoy our tech content, go ahead and subscribe. Until next time, catch you guys later.